guys, let me take the honor of inviting Alok to speak to us on the financial management in this crucial time. When the whole industry is struggling, especially we definitely being startup. So Alok has been into it for a long time. He has been in the corporate side. He has been doing the corporate sales, and
Guys, sorry, I think we lost Sunil again here.
Hello. Yeah, Alok.
Yeah, I can hear you now. You got lost, but please carry on. Yeah.
Yeah. So Alok is now partner at Stellaris Venture, and before this, he had a long journey, Helion Advisors. So I was
Yeah. Guys, I know that you can hear me and that you can't hear Sunil. I'm seeing the messages. Why don't Sunil, actually, if I may take the control from you. Okay, I guess he's lost again. But first of all, a good afternoon to all of you. And thank you for taking out the time for this session. I want to begin by first hoping, praying that all of you and all of your family members, wherever they are in the country or in the world, are safe. I think we are going through times that were actually very, very hard to imagine, I guess, even 10 days back. So I just hope that everyone is safe at this point in time. Otherwise, we have far bigger worries as opposed to discussing the topic that we are discussing at hand. I also want to begin by, I guess, adding the fact that in general, it's hard being an entrepreneur to begin with. I mean, I always say that the reason I love being in the profession is because our everyday job is working with people who are not only dreamers, but they're actually insane enough to pursue those dreams as well. And I think all of you on the call today define essentially that insane DNA of its own kind. You take extreme amounts of risk. And on top of it, suddenly we all land ourselves into situations that are very difficult to plan for. I would not be surprised that there are founders on this call today who are questioning the decisions that they took 1 month back, 2 months back, 6 months back, and asking themselves that they wish they had done something differently. If I were you, I wouldn't be worrying about those, because I think what we are dealing with is something we could not have planned for. It is absolutely unprecedented and completely unpredictable. That being said, we all are in the position of being founders, CEOs, CTOs. And, as they say in life, you can't control the cards you are given. All you can control is how you play at that point in time. And clearly, this time is going to be a defining one for all of you. I happen to be on a call with a very senior Chinese leader. He's actually one of the biggest business guys from China. And I was on a video call with him yesterday. And I took away 4 messages from him. His message number 1 was that, look, the fire has started, whether you like it or not. So therefore, act now. Act before the fire reaches you. Number 2 was, please overreact. And he emphasized on this again and again. I'm going to touch upon that in the rest of our discussion also. Number 3, which is also very critical, is that take the front seat as CEOs. Not your investors, not your employees, but actually it is you. So it is you guys as CEOs who need to take the front seat in this entire movie, and the driving seat, because people are going to look at your confidence. And lastly, that it is the safety of your people, followed by business continuity, that become the most important things. But essentially what I took away from this call was that here is a man who has a 2-month head start into the situation, because it was just a Chinese problem until even some time back. But even with the 2 months head start, if you look at his perspective, there is actually very little clarity on how this situation is going to emerge. Some people will argue it's going to be 2 months, some will call it 6 months, some for 12 months. The reality is nobody knows. And we just wish we knew. So, I had written a blog just a few days back. I'm actually going to be articulating a lot of messages from that blog. Guys, can you hear me? I mean, I don't know if one or two of you can send me a chat message on the group saying that you can hear, because I'm not sure if you guys can hear. Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you so much. Before I go into the messages that I had written, which I'm going to articulate, and some other ones, because even from the time I wrote the blog to now, I feel that every day, we are learning something new, is to put at least my learnings in context. So I started working in 1993. And 93 was actually the first US crisis that happened. In the grand scheme of things, it was actually not that big a crisis. Didn't really matter to me. 97 was the next one, when there was a meltdown of the entire financial system of largely Southeast Asian countries and China. It was related to real estate. I used to work for McKinsey in those days. And to be honest, again, I was a junior guy. It didn't really impact my life as much. But the ones that did impact were 2001, 2002. And then clearly, I think most of us who were around, 2008, 2009 as well. And the difference in the context is that in 2001, I actually used to work with a consulting firm. This was a firm by the name McKenna Group, one of the very well-known boutiques in the Bay Area, started back in the early 70s when Intel and Apple had just about started. So from those days, it had built a very strong reputation, was a boutique firm. And I left McKinsey to join them. I was delighted with the work they do. And the ending of the story was that at the end of 2002, we had to close shop. We essentially died. Not a good situation. I was actually the last employee to leave from that company. 2008, 2009, I was working for SAP. I used to work for SAP in the US, transferred to India in 2007. And in 2008, I was running what they call the strategic accounts, which is essentially SAP's largest accounts in the country, is what my sales territory was. That used to constitute about 40% of our revenue at that point in time. So it was an important territory. And again, like all downturns, they're bad. However, we survived that one. That was the difference between 2001 and 2008. And some of the, at least learnings I will go through are going to be related to these two. But please do bear in mind that as we go through it, remember that every downturn is different. Remember that every company is different, and therefore the impact that the current situation might have is going to be different. And therefore, while I think it is good to have certain patterns, but I think in the end, these patterns take you only so far. You will have to do first principles thinking for your own startup. So let's step back. A crisis has actually struck you. What are your objectives as a CEO? And I'm actually going to be a little bit presumptuous, and I'll articulate actually two goals. Goal number one is actually be around by the time we return to normalcy of some kind. And I'm putting that as priority number one. Priority two is be ready to capture the advantage of being around by the time normal life resumes and actually emerge out stronger at that point in time. And if I may take like a cricket analogy, and maybe it's not a great analogy, but let's assume that your team has been asked to bat. And guess what? It happens to be a very, very cloudy morning. The pitch is very uneven. And you know by past behavior that when the sun comes out, it'll actually become very good for batting. Now, you could choose to play a Sehwag at that point where you're saying, you know what, being defensive doesn't work. I'm going to throw my bat. If I score, that's great. If I get out, so be it. The other strategy is the Dravid strategy, which is that I want to make sure that either I or my team have sufficient time by the time sun comes out, and we have not folded up by that time, and they just sort of stick it out, play the hard game, don't score too many runs possibly in that period as well. But guess what? By the time the sun comes out, he and Lakshman are still batting on the crease. And I think if I were you in this situation, at least at this point in time, I would be playing the Dravid or the Lakshman strategy. I would actually not be playing the Sehwag strategy. And by the way, I love Sehwag, so please don't take these analogies very literally. But I'm just trying to point out as to what the objective should be. Now, over the last week, 10 days, I guess like all of you, we have had discussions with pretty much all of our portfolio founders. It's a tough time for everyone. And everyone, I think their first instinct is to read a lot and try and figure out how long is this crisis going to last. And I think my first advice is that you should stop predicting how long and how deep this crisis is going to be. Because the reality is, as smart as you are, or as smart as everyone, all of us are, there is no way you can predict. There are no patterns for predicting this thing. Last time we had a great flu outbreak, guess what, was 1918 or 1919. World is a very different place since then, but each virus is different as well. And despite all the resources that all large countries have at their disposal, you can look at the reaction of a UK, you can look at the reaction of a US. I don't think anybody has a damn clue of what they're doing at the moment. What you can do, however, is to say, what are the different scenarios? In these scenarios, what can be my reactions? And if I take the permutations and combinations of these, what are my upsides and what are my downsides? So what is a risk I'm willing to live with? Or what is a risk I'm not willing to live with? And at least the way I would think about it is to say that, look, this could be a very short crisis. So let's assume that the world becomes normal again in 3 months. Or it takes 12 to 18 months. And it's not just about the disease itself. It's the economic fallout post the disease that is equally important when you are actually defining these scenarios. So we take a 12 to 18 months, if not longer, kind of a period in terms of the evolution. If you look at your reactions to it, you could overreact. So there are founders I know who have cut costs dramatically, including actually people who have let go of their entire teams also in this situation. Versus those that are saying that, look, guys, this may not be as bad. I think we should take incremental steps and let's watch how this plays out. And maybe if we really need to, we will take sort of more dramatic measures tomorrow if we need to. And if you look at the permutation combinations of these, clearly, if it's a short crisis and you underreact, of course, it's a great thing for you because you have continued to march on at full pace. You don't have to go through the process of rehiring, ramping up again, and some of the lost market traction and lost market position. So you're in good shape. Also, if the crisis continues very long and you cut very deep, again, you survive. I think we in general struggle in these middle scenarios. Given the fact that it is very unpredictable, you can take two different kinds of risks. One is that it's a short crisis and you have overreacted, or it's a long crisis and you have underreacted. And again, judge the pros and cons of this. And it's not a straightforward equation. I won't say that, look, one situation applies for everyone. If you have a lot of cash in the bank, you have very low burn for your company, and let's say the impact of the downturn is actually not as strong for you, you might actually come to a different conclusion. I am making a generic assumption, at least on this webcast, that for most of you, there will be some burn which is meaningful to your cash in the bank. And you may not have as much cash in the bank also. And there is a very real impact of this crisis on your company. If that is the case, you are better off actually trying to overreact, even if the situation or even if the crisis does not go on for too long. Because if you still have money in the bank, you may still lose 3 months in rebuilding yourself, rehiring, ramping up again, but at least you know that you will be around. Your flip side scenario can be actually a disaster, which is that you underreacted and therefore you actually are not able to survive at all. And therefore, I would therefore optimize for just being around. Number one, I will also add, and this is just an opinion, at least why I think, and this is, I know I'm violating the rule that I just said, which is stop predicting. I think if you look, there are economic cycles in every economy. If you look at India, we went through a boom phase maybe in 2018, part of 2019. We saw our GDP growth decline. We saw that there was a sentiment, at least amongst most investors, and I would argue therefore founders as well, that there might be funding crunch down the road. So people were anyway preparing for certain level of winter setting in this environment. I think the addition of what the coronavirus crisis has done, which of course is unpredictable, is that our financial system will be fighting this crisis not from a position of strength, but I would argue from a position of weakness, therefore. And while I'm worried about how long corona crisis lasts, I'm actually equally worried about the economic fallout of this corona crisis. And why I think it is different from 2008 or 2001 is that it is not an economic crisis alone. I think there might be a massive loss of lives in this situation. So I think sentimentally, there is a chance. I'm not saying, nobody knows whether that's for sure or not, but there is a chance that this might end up being a really deep crisis. And therefore, if I were you, I'll plan for that scenario. Number two, as you begin to plan, what do? All of you have these spreadsheets. You must have made an operating plan for the year, and you begin to tweak with that spreadsheet. What do? You tweak with the top line, you tweak with the costs. And again, because you're entrepreneurs, I believe that you're optimistic. At least, let me put it a different way, that if you were not optimistic, you will probably not be entrepreneurs. So what happens when you begin on the top, when you begin to tweak the top line? You say, oh, I was thinking that I will be 5x at the end of 2020. Maybe because of the crisis, I'll be 3x. Okay, let me take a worst case scenario. I'll be 2x. Maybe that's right, but maybe that is wrong. And I think it'll be very hard for you to predict whether it'll be 2x, 3x, or you'll be flat, or you actually might be reduced from where you are. Because, as I said, again, nobody knows how deep this will be. But let's take the example of, and again, I invest mostly in SaaS. I will take a SaaS example, but this could be applied to other industries as well. If you are a SaaS company, what's going to happen? Most enterprise software, first of all, the purchases can be done later. Nothing is mission critical for most part, right? Even established categories like CRM, if you are going to buy a CRM software today, well, chances are that you were working on a spreadsheet before this. And if you were making a decision today, you can say, fine, if I was working on spreadsheets until now, maybe I can work for 3 more months, maybe 6 more months on spreadsheets. I can always buy later. Number two, so what that does is that your top line or your net new customers in the revenue that you are adding goes down. Number two, in SaaS, mostly customers pay you annual upfront. And that's how cash flows, or that's why the cash flows of SaaS companies are so attractive. But guess what? Now when somebody is becoming a customer, they also have no idea whether how much cash they should burn at this point in time. So they might say, as opposed to paying you annually, I'm going to pay you quarterly or maybe monthly. And you guys will not be in a position to push back on those demands. Number three, your existing customers who are coming up for renewal, even though they like you, but they will also renegotiate the payment terms. Many of them actually will not renew their contracts. Even those who do, they will renegotiate the pricing. You add all of these up together, and what you find is that the cash flow profile of what looked like a beautiful curve going upwards certainly looks dramatically different. So think about all the things that can happen differently. And again, I will go back to the Chinese example that I was just talking about. Plan for the worst case. It'll be great that the worst case is not as bad as you thought it could be, but you will be in a worse situation if you don't plan for it. So I think be realistic, and actually, in fact, be more critical than realistic is what I would argue. That's one part of it. The other part of it is that as you begin to now there are many founders I'm talking to who will say, oh, my burn was 50 lakh a month currently. So let me cut down 20% of the cost, which means I saved 10 lakh. My cash was going to last for the next 18 months. I save 1.8 crores. And given that my burn is now 40 lakh, therefore I'm going to be around for 4.5 more months beyond what I thought. So my runway is 22.5 months. Again, guess what? Life is not going to work this way. Why? Because part of your burn is not related to your cost. It is related to your reduction in top line. So as your top line reduces, your cash collection reduces. Now your burn on a monthly basis is actually higher than what you thought it is going to be. And I'm actually going to quote, without naming, a very good friend of mine from another fund. And he has made this statement often in the board meeting, but he says that as a founder, you can control your destiny only when you have cash in the bank. And to be honest, nothing could be more true than this. So you need to make sure that your cash runway is for a sufficient period of time for you to be able to see through this crisis. And as you do that, rethink about what your burn is going to be. Many of you might be thinking that, look, what we can actually go back to our investors and raise more money. I would again be cautious about that thinking, not because investors don't want to keep you alive, not because they don't want to invest in you or they don't believe in you. They do believe in you. They bought into that dream, which is the reason why they wrote the check in the first place. But remember that all funds have a certain portfolio construction, and they need to do a certain number of investments. They need to have a certain number of ownership in those investments. Their math and their calculations go completely haywire at this point. They also know, much like our hospitals at the moment, that there are going to be a lot of patients which are going to be admitted in the ICU, and therefore you are going to need ventilators. But there are not going to be enough ventilators for everyone. And therefore, your investors will have no choice but to make selective calls at that point in time. So even though your investors are also planning for the worst case, but they will not be able to give cash to every company. They will also not be democratic. They will put money behind where they think there are maximum chances of success. And therefore, I would not make any planning, any operating plan today, assuming that you are going to get a bridge round or you will be able to do the next round of fundraise. At least it's going to be very, very hard. Some of you might be lucky, but I guarantee that most of you will actually not be able to get to the next round of funding, at least not that easily. So I will again go back to my 2001, 2002 situation. I remember that the first time there was any indication that, look, the world may go south was in 2000 first quarter calendar, when I think Amazon missed its first quarter earning. And before that, we had a massive bull run on the stock markets. And Amazon missed its first quarterly earning. I was reading, actually, somebody posted an article that Amazon was lucky that it raised a deadline of $678 million in that first quarter before they missed their first forecast. But most of us actually did not imagine that that's a big deal. First of all, Amazon was not a big deal in 2000. And we thought that that's okay, that's a minor blip. So we all underreacted. And quarter after quarter, we saw some more bad news, but we never planned for the worst case scenario. And at least I remember that for my firm, we never anticipated what could happen. So even the discretionary expenses that we had as a firm, we continued to do. So we had these off-sites in Europe at that point. There were some other, and again, training expenses are great, but in certain times you may want to rethink or at least be more efficient with it. But we continued to spend as if nothing had changed. And I think in our case, we realized too late. And by the time we reacted, there wasn't much that we could do about it. So let's actually come to the part that, okay, you do need to control your burn. How do you control your burn? And again, I'll go back to the framework of top line and the expenses. First thing to think about is what can you do to protect your top line. In general, our first tendency is to cut costs, which I think you may not have an option, you may still need to do. But I think you should first think about the top line. And again, if I were you, I'll be thinking about what can I do to make sure that my existing customers continue. Now, there are some situations where you can't do much about it. So imagine that you're a mobility company. There is a 1 month shutdown. Thereafter, let's say you are a kind of mobility company, which is a shared mobility. Chances are many of your customers are going to hesitate to use any vehicle which is used as a shared ride. So your top line then is going to be impacted no matter what you do. But there are situations where your top line may actually be protected, or at least if you take the right steps. And these are the times when I would actually focus a lot on engagement. I would focus a lot on customer success. If you are, and again, I'll go back to my SaaS examples, that if you are a SaaS business, I would actually double up on my customer success function at this point in time. Go the extra mile with your customer. Communicate actually far more than what you did with them in the past. Assure them that, look, you are going to continue the service, and as to why your quality is not going to come down during these times. Ask them what extra you can do to be of service to them and bring that to them. You may even want to think about some extra incentives for your customer success team. But in the end, I still think that you have no choice but to go for cost reductions. Because while you will try and protect your top line, and you may be able to protect it to a certain extent, but you still will have to go for cost cutting. Many CEOs actually that we have been speaking to first have the tendency to cut down expenses and actually not cut down people cost in any form. Again, while that is not a bad idea, and I think you should. So all of you should be renegotiating your rental contracts. If you have lease payments, you have payments to other creditors, I think you should be thinking of renegotiating each one of them. If you are paying a software vendor or any other vendor, you should be either rethinking of negotiating those contracts again, or you might actually want to think about which ones do you not need to use at all and actually cut that burn altogether. Doing all that, again, there are some businesses where these costs can actually lead to a lot of reduction. By and large, most businesses we know, a bulk of their P&L is actually on the cost side, is basically people. And therefore, you have no choice but to cut your burn by actually cutting the people burn as well. There are two ways in which you can do it. You can do salary reductions across the board, or you can actually let people go. And this topic has been debated a lot over the last week. I'll give you my perspective, and this may not be a very popular perspective, and I'm not even claiming that this is necessarily the right perspective. But I do believe that, first of all, do not make any decisions from the point of being emotional. And I do think that even though all of you will deny it, but I think all of you end up being slightly emotional when taking people calls, because these are the teams that you have built from scratch. This is not a company you joined as an employee. You're founders. You built it brick by brick. And letting some of those bricks go is actually very, very hard. And therefore, your first tendency is that we will live as a family together. And sometimes that may be the wrong call. It may be a boat which can take only so much load in the storm. And let's say there are only 4 people that can be loaded, but you have 10 people on the board. If you put all 10, the boat will sink no matter what you do. You will have to make those judgment calls in terms of who are the 4 that should be on that boat. Do not think that you are being a bad leader, first of all. I think people are looking at this point for you to be decisive. They recognize that it is not your doing. Coronavirus is not something that you invented. They recognize that your business is being hit very hard. But I think people will blame you if you don't act decisively at this point in time. I also think that it is very dangerous to try and cut multiple times. And it's extremely demoralizing for the team. In general, people are okay taking bad news, but they are not okay taking bad news every week. Because that creates a culture of uncertainty. It creates a culture of fear. And that's the last thing you want to avoid. You want to make sure that, okay, you have made the cuts that you had to make. But now the people left on your boat, they know that with this team, you can survive the storm. And therefore, they are committed to actually making you survive, and they're motivated to being around at that point in time. So be decisive, but I would say also do it once and cut deep if you have to. But do not dilly-dally. Do not be wishful. Do not say, I will do this now, and 1 month later, I'm going to take another judgment call. Actually, that's the worst thing you can do to your business. I would say that sometimes you may have to do a mixture of both letting people go and also taking salary cuts. That is possible because there are times when you may cut your team to a bare bone where you cannot actually remove any more people, but you still are not able to cut the burn to the point that you needed to. And at least one thing I will urge to you as leaders of your companies is that as leaders, you should step forward and be taking a compensation cut at this time also. There is pain all around you. People know that you are pained, but I think even if it is symbolic, I would actually go in that direction, because people need to see that are you the first person in line when it comes to taking pain or not. In general, as a leader, if anybody is being hit, I think you should be taking it on your chest as well, and people need to see that. So many CEOs I know are wondering at this point in time that, look, anyway, they were not making market salaries, right? They could be getting a job with far better salaries. So they already are in a very salary cut environment to begin with. But I would argue that as a leader, purely for symbolic purpose, I think you should. Take some other measures also. And I will give you one example from SAP days. Number one, we of course cut people at that point in time. And I'll confess that professionally, that was the toughest moment, at least I faced in my career, because we had to let go a lot of people in one single chunk. In hindsight, I'm glad we did it. But we did some other things also, which turned out to be actually very good practices. So we found that we had a large enterprise business, which is the one I was running at that point. But we also had a very large SMB business. And in SMB business, we were finding that we were booking revenue, but many of these customers were not paying. Some were not paying in time, but many were actually just not paying itself. And we were having to take charges later on. So we made a new rule at that point, and this rule was born in 2009, that all SMB customers, we will sell only for cash. You have to prepay, and only then will I give you the license key. Our sales guys were up in arms. They said, this is not going to work. And of course, it did not work with certain category of customers. We let those customers go. We said, we don't want your business. Thank you. The ones we actually did take were those that actually paid. And you realize that these were the ones which are actually going to be the more loyal customers. I was having this discussion yesterday with another CEO in our portfolio, where they have different kinds of payment terms. And one of the conclusions that we came to is that the customers who were taking the monthly payment option are actually the ones which churn the most. So they're actually the most undesirable customers. So these are times when you might actually step up and say, you know what? These are customers I don't even want. Make some rules actually even more stringent. I know it's a bit counterintuitive, but you might find that depending on the business that you are running, some of these might actually work to your advantage. And the last thing I'll say is that given that these are times of fear and times of uncertainty, over-communicate. Also, I think we are even in more unusual times where most of us are working from homes. We can't do anything. We can't go to the office, so you can't see people face to face. It's going to be very hard for all of you anyway, because you are going to be rationalizing cost while all of you are sitting at home. It makes things really, really hard actually. But this is the time to communicate with your customers, with your suppliers. And again, I emphasize suppliers also. Remember, your suppliers are also companies. You are their customers. Like you are insecure, they're also insecure. They want to be around to serve you as well. So make sure that you are communicating with them very regularly as well. Give them a little bit of a line of sight about the business they are earning from you. Talk to your investors. They're probably your best buddies at this point in time because their interest are actually completely aligned with you. Remember that your investors don't make anything until you become big, until you survive. So while you and them may disagree on your opinions, but at least you have the right and aligned incentives. And the last one, most importantly, over communicate with your employees. And particularly as you are doing cost rationalizations, make sure that you communicate to everyone what the situation is, what's the impact on your business, why are you doing what you are doing, what's your total cost, how much cost do you need to remove for your company to survive, how have you thought about it. Be clear, be crisp, do not give them a false hope. That's the one thing that you should never do. So don't say that, look, I think, or maybe, or this or that. There is no place for words like that at this point. Be very clear and be very decisive as you do these communication to all your employees as well. So clearly these are bad times. I know that many of you probably have thought far ahead on this thing. As we are seeing within our portfolio, we are finding that there are CEOs who have acted with remarkable speed and with remarkable clarity, versus those that actually still are dilly-dallying. They are not sure. They're still trying to estimate how long and how deep this crisis is going to be. They're still trying to estimate their top lines, thinking about how much cost should they cut, not cut. And I think that's not a good situation to be in. But I will take a pause and open ourselves up for questions for the 15 minutes that we have.
So Alok, I think we have one question for now. Can you share some?
And Sunil, I don't know if you are on the call. What is the best way for me to take questions?
Yeah, Alok, can you hear me? Hello? Hello? Alok, can you hear me?
So maybe I'll, since I'm at least not hearing anything, I am on chat, so I can see the questions. So I will answer the first question that I see here. I'm going to articulate the question also, which is that what are some best practices to build a low-touch B2B SaaS sales / marketing funnel? It's a generic question, probably not as related to the topic that we are discussing today, but maybe given that there is no other question, I'll still take it at this point in time. But I think your sales model is highly dependent on many factors. And I don't think that you can generalize in terms of whether it's going to be low touch, high touch. It depends on the size of the deals. It depends on the category, how much education you have to do for that category, how much integration or plumbing you have to do for that category, how many people need to be convinced for that sale to happen. And based on that, you'll be able to figure out whether it's low touch, high touch, etc. I think the only thing I'll say is that make sure that your ACV, which is annual contract value, and your sales cycle cost are aligned. And if they are not in sync, then I think it'll be very hard for you to build a cash efficient company. Given that there are more questions on the topic that we are discussing, and actually this thing is rolling very quickly. So I actually am trying to figure out how I can go back to the question. I run a company that works in both offline and online mode. A lot of my cash inflow is stuck in checks and checkbooks kept in institutions. So again, as I'm reading this question, I'm assuming that essentially a lot of your cash is in transit or on paper, which you are struggling to convert. To be honest, I don't have a great suggestion immediately that at least I can come up with. But I am assuming that, look, all banks are still working. So if you have checks, please cash those checks, right? Important to have the cash. If there are some customer payments that are going to come, I would actually put a lot of effort in collection of those checks today. I think that is important to do because $1 today than a promise of $1 tomorrow, I think there's a lot of difference between the two. And that cash is worth gold for you at this point in time. So I would be putting a lot of emphasis at this point in time. For whatever it is worth, I'll give you one example. I used to handle one of the largest accounts in the country back in 2008, 2009. And we had a massive amount of cash stuck. And this is in very large double-digit crores that was stuck with that customer. And that customer is not known to pay easily. And we said we will not do any business with this company until we collect the cash. I must have made 20 visits to that company at that point in time just to be able to collect that cash. It took me an entire year to collect that cash. But I think it was worth it because that cash gives you a lot of flexibility. So if you're founders, I'm hoping that you guys are paying a lot of attention, because even more than selling or more than renewing existing customers, there's actually real cash that actually belongs to you. Sorry, these questions are going very rapidly. I actually don't know. I guess I'll just pick the last ones. The last one is, for the B2B enterprise SaaS, the most expensive resources are the sales guys, and they are too few. How do you think we should think about letting them go? The pipeline itself is 3 months long. It'll be difficult to rehire and build a pipe again. Okay, good question. At least in my portfolio, this question is coming up literally with every portfolio company that I have, which is, how should you think about salespeople? So I would say 2 things that you should think about optimizing here. Number 1, I would actually not worry too much about hiring in the future and their ramp up unless you have a lot of cash in the bank. So my algorithm will be that if you have a lot of cash in the bank, please keep all your good people around in sales, because it's difficult to find and it takes a long time to ramp up. So I should just keep them. Number 2 is that in case you don't have sufficient cash, you do have to make a judgment call. Of course, there are always people who are not great performers. And I think you should think about that Pareto chart. Those that are not the best performers, you should let them go. Please do recognize that in the short term, the quality of your pipeline and number of deals in your pipe is actually going to go down. So you do actually need lesser number of salespeople in the short run. And therefore, it's okay to reduce sales capacity, but don't reduce it too far, because at some point you might be, this is like, sitting on a tree branch and you're cutting with the axe that branch itself. That's what you might do, because it's not about the people burn only. It's a top line reduction that also adds to your burn. So by letting your good salespeople go, you might actually be hurting your top line in this situation. So I would be a bit careful in cutting down on the salespeople too far.
Alok, am I audible?
The next question is, there are some businesses which can grow despite slowdown. Do you think VCs are open to investment in content space? Tough question. You are right that if you look at online content consumption, it has dramatically gone up. I think that the generic answer to your question is that yes, VCs are always open. See, remember that lots of VCs have a lot of dry powder. They still will be making new investment. And actually current times might be good times to make those investments. So they're mostly all open for business. They're meeting entrepreneurs, they're evaluating companies. So I think at a generic level, the answer is yes. I would though, however, also add 2 caveats to my statement, which is that, number 1, the way content businesses work is not just about engagement. It's also about revenue, which is usually advertising revenue. And again, I'm simplifying things too much. There might be other models, but largely this is advertising revenue. And I think people who are advertisers on your platform, they will be shying away from spending too many marketing dollars at this point in time. So I think you guys will also see, even though you might see an increase in engagement, but I think you're going to see a hit on your monetization, at least in the short term, number 1. Number 2 is that VCs, even when they have dry powder, they don't know whether to keep additional reserves for their existing companies, or should they be making new bets. Also, even when they do want to make the new bets, usually when you fund a company, you say, okay, I'm putting in money and the cash is going to last for 12 months, maybe 18 months. And at that point, they have to raise a new round. And for most VCs, that next round is done by somebody else and not you. If as a VC, you don't know how long this crisis is going to last, and by the time this company comes up for its next round of investment, whether other investors will be willing to fund or not, I think that does create a little bit of a doubt in the VC's head also. And therefore, I think whether we like it or not, I think most investors will slow down. I don't think anybody's going to stop making investments, but at least in the short term, until there is more clarity, I think people will see a slowdown of funding.
Alok, can you hear me?
There is a question here on, is the government going to step in to help companies under Startup India? Any lobbying going on? Actually, to be honest, I am not competent to answer that question. I do know that there are lots of nodal agencies which are trying to help in many different ways. If you go to Twitter or other channels, I'm sure you will find different places where you can actually put your voice out there, request for help. But again, I'm not the expert on this topic, so I'll stay away. Let me see more question. How to go for working capital loan in these times? Very interesting question. Again, a tough one. And again, I mean, I keep saying tough one for everything because I think everything is tough right now. Unless you are a pharma company, healthcare company, or some of the other related sectors. See, the working capital loans are given in lieu of cash flow that's going to come. Unless cash can be guaranteed, it'll be very hard for your underwriters to underwrite. And at this time, I think it'll be very difficult for anybody to guarantee that cash coming in. So I think you might find yourself in two scenarios. Number one is that, well, actually, number one is I'm actually even thinking is not even a maybe, it will happen, which is that your working capital cycles will go up. And therefore, your working capital requirements might go up unless they are dampened by the reduction of overall volume of business, which in itself is not a good thing. But as your working capital needs are going up, you will find that people who were earlier underwriting, so whether it's venture debt or any other source which was underwriting working capital loans, I think it's going to be hard. I would recommend that in case some of you are doing business with large companies, the thing is that the cost of capital for large companies is far smaller than it is for you. I think it might be feasible, not sure, might be feasible for some of you to renegotiate with some of your larger customers, even if it means giving them some discount on the top line, because they will be able to ride out the crisis because they have cash in the bank. So you might be able to create situations or create deals where you get what you need most, which is cash, and they get what they need most, which is a discount. But I would actually try and renegotiate. If you are working with a startup, then I think it'll be very hard. Okay, somebody has just said, assuming overreaction and increasing runway, would you advise raising venture debt? I think the reality is that venture debt is going to be very hard to raise. If I'm a venture debt provider, I'll be thinking twice. Because just like you can't predict your business, a venture debt fund is going to be even more hard-pressed to predict your business. So I think it'll be very, very difficult to raise venture debt at this point in time, unless you have very assured cash flows that you can bank against, or your existing investors are willing to underwrite the venture debt providers, in which case effectively it's your VC which is underwriting and not the venture debt in that situation. So I would not be banking on that at this point. So I know we are towards the pretty much the end of the time. Maybe I can take one more question. Okay, I'm going to read a long question maybe. That somebody has a startup which is doing maintenance. Okay, I can't read it because it's scrolling up. Sorry. Very difficult to... I think I'll take a pause maybe here. I don't know, Sunil, if you want to chime in at this point in time.
Alok, can you hear me?
So somebody has put a question saying that they are doing services for HVACs, and there is, given that it needs physical services, and that's not even possible. And he's saying that I may have to relieve all my technical team in this kind of crisis. And how can I keep everything from falling apart while protecting sustainability? I think that's a very tough question. I think for those of you who have completely physical businesses, I think you have to completely rethink what you do at this point in time. I can tell you that one of our companies, which is a very physical company, took the following call. They had raised money just some time back. They still had money in the bank. They said that their best option is to actually remove everyone because they were very early stage. They didn't have a scale at this point. So they were not worried about how much are they going to lose in terms of traction. They said that, look, let me keep the money in the bank. If it means I'm restarting the company 8 months later, I will do it. But I don't want to burn when I don't know what the outlook is going to be. In your case, I mean, for this particular entrepreneur, I think it's very hard for me to suggest something because I will need to understand more before I can. But I do empathize that it's going to be a very tough situation to be in. Sunil, over to you.
Hello. Hello, can you hear me? Can rest of the people hear me?
Sunil, we can't hear you. I think Sunil is going in and out. Why don't I do the job of, first of all, I do want to thank everyone on the call. I know that you are dealing with fires to begin with, and taking time out for an hour to be on this call. I really, really appreciate what you have done. I also want to thank Sunil in particular and NASSCOM for organizing this and giving me the opportunity to talk to all of you. So really appreciate that as well. Some of you have written saying, how can they be in touch with me? Look, I would love to answer questions individually. I can see in the list of people on the call, there are lots of you who I actually know personally. So I would love for you to reach out. Maybe I can request NASSCOM to send out my email address. I'm happy to. I will try to respond to as many things as I can possibly, but I may not be necessarily able to respond to everything as well. So thank you so much, and good luck to all of you.